A woman rancher was sold over debt until a frontiersman placed her among his people. The Kansas plains lay heavy under the dying sun, the horizon painted with streaks of fire and ash. Clara Monroe gripped the reins of her weary mare and stared at the ranch that had consumed every drop of her youth. The barn sagged under the wind. The roof of the house leaned as if bowing to defeat. It wasn't laziness nor neglect. It was debt growing faster than corn in a good summer, and far heavier than any storm. Her father, Jacob, sat slumped on the porch. His hat lay discarded by his boots, his face carved with shame deeper than the drought cracks in the fields. Clara swung down from the saddle, her heart pounding. When Jacob finally spoke, his voice trembled like a man announcing a death. "Daughter, there's no other way. The creditor comes tomorrow. I offered you." The words struck harder than any whip. Not the last cow, not the workhorse, not even the failing lander. Clara Monroe, a woman who had fought off wolves, hauled water in blistering summers, and kept this land alive by sheer will, was now to be treated as payment. She staggered back, as if the earth had given way beneath her. Betrayal cut deeper than fear. The silence that followed was heavier than chains, broken only by the restless moan of the prairie wind. Then, faint but certain, came the sound of hooves. Clara's head snapped toward the distant ridge. A lone rider sat astride a dark horse, half hidden by the dying light. No one knew his true story. Some whispered his name as Elias Kane, a frontiersman who lived between two worlds, part outlaw, part guardian, at home among settlers and native tribes alike. Clara couldn't know it yet, but her fate, sold like cattle in the night, was about to be rewritten by that stranger. A lantern glowed down the road. The creditor had come. The lantern swung from the creditor's buggy as it rattled up the dusty road, throwing long, crooked shadows across the yard. Clara's father rose to his feet on the porch, shoulders bent as if he bore a cross too heavy for any man. Clara stood frozen, her fists clenched at her sides. The man who stepped down from the buggy was everything the prairie despised: slick, smug, and fat on the hunger of others. Jebediah Crowley. He had once been nothing but a trader of saddles and salt, but years of lending money at impossible rates had fattened him into the kind of man who owned others' lives outright. Tonight he had come to claim hers. "Well, Jacob," Crowley sneered, brushing dust from his fine coat, "you've kept me waiting long enough. Where's the girl?" Jacob swallowed hard, his voice barely a rasp. "She's here." Clara felt the ground tilt beneath her. Was her father truly handing her over like a calf at auction? She stepped forward, her chin high, though her chest burned with shame. "You'll not own me like a mule, Crowley." His lips curled in something between a smile and a snarl. "Your pa signed the papers. Debt's a chain, girl, and you're the shackle." He reached for her wrist. Clara pulled back, her breath sharp, but her father raised a trembling hand. "Please, Clara," he whispered. "I had no choice." Those words cut deeper than any insult Crowley could fling. No choice? He had 1,000 choices. He could have fought, he could have run, he could have let the land go. But he had chosen the one that stripped her of dignity. Crowley's grip closed around her arm like iron. "Enough talk. You'll come with me." Clara twisted free, her eyes blazing. "I'll die before I belong to you." Crowley laughed, a cold, wheezing sound. "Death's cheaper than debt, but it won't pay what your father owes." He jerked his head toward his men, two rough shapes climbing down from their horses. They moved closer, the gleam of revolvers at their belts catching the lantern light. For a moment Clara considered bolting into the darkness, running across the fields until her lungs gave out. But where would she go? Crowley's reach was long, and the law bent to his coin. She would not make it fall. Her heart pounded as she stood rooted, fighting the urge to cry. She would not give this man the satisfaction of tears. Crowley shoved her toward the buggy. "Get her inside." The men advanced. One of them grabbed her arm, the other pulled at her shawl. Clara struggled, kicking, clawing, her voice breaking the silence of the night. And then hooves thundered across the hard earth. All heads turned as a lone rider broke through the darkness, his horse charging straight into the yard. A rifle rested across his saddle, gleaming under the lantern glow. He pulled the reins and stopped in a spray of dust, his silhouette broad, shoulders squared, face hidden beneath the brim of a weather-worn hat. Crowley scowled. "Who in hell are you?" The rider dismounted slowly, every movement deliberate, as if the ground itself obeyed his pace. He walked forward, boots crunching on gravel, and his voice carried like low thunder. "Let the girl go." Clara's breath caught. She didn't know this man, but something in his tone left no room for doubt. It wasn't a plea, it was a command. Crowley laughed again, but there was a crack in it, the first sign of unease. "This is none of your business, stranger. Walk away before I bury you here." The rider's hand hovered near his revolver. Calm, steady, as if he'd faced down death 100 times and grown tired of its face. His eyes gray, unyielding, fixed on Crowley. "You'll not touch her again." Crowley's men draw their guns. The night air tightened around the yard, heavy with dust and tension. Crowley's men pulled their pistols with slow, confident hands, their mouths curling into cruel grins. Clara's breath caught, but the stranger didn't flinch. He stood as if carved from stone, his hand brushing the butt of his revolver, calm as the whisper of wind through prairie grass. Crowley stepped closer, his jowls quivering with fury. "You think you can interfere with my property? This girl's mine, bought fair and square from her own father." Clara wanted to shout that she was no man's property, but the words stuck in her throat. She glanced at her father. Jacob's eyes were fixed on the floorboards of the porch, shame pinning him like a nail through wood. Her heart cracked at the sight. The stranger spoke again, his tone flat, final. "A woman is no man's coin." Crowley barked a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's coin out here. Land, cattle, sweat, even breath. And she's worth more than your meddling, drifter." One of Crowley's men stepped forward, cocking his revolver. Clara's pulse raced any second. The night could explode into blood. But the stranger moved faster than her eyes could follow. A flash of steel, the crack of gunfire, and the hired man collapsed into the dirt, his weapon spinning from his hand. The second man froze, his pistol half raised. The stranger's revolver was already aimed between his eyes. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breaths of the wounded man writhing in the dust. Crowley's face drained of color. "You'll pay for this." The stranger turned his gaze on Clara. For the first time she saw him clearly in the lantern light. His eyes were pale gray, cold, yet steady, like storm clouds that promised both ruin and rain. He looked at her as though she mattered, as though she wasn't just a debt to be bartered. Then he faced Crowley again, his words carrying like the low growl of thunder. "I'll pay your debt, in silver." From his saddlebag he drew a small pouch and let it fall to the ground with a heavy jingle. Coins spilled into the dirt, bright as moonlight. Crowley glanced at them, but his jaw hardened. "No," he spat. "Silver can't buy what I already own. I'll take the girl. She's mine." Clara's stomach turned. It wasn't greed that drove Crowley. It was power, the sick pleasure of seeing her humiliate. He wanted the entire county to know he could reduce a woman rancher to nothing more than a chit in his ledger. The stranger's revolver never wavered. "Then you'll take her over my dead body." The standoff stretched like a wire ready to snap. Clara's chest burned with fear, but also with something new, a strange flicker of hope. This man, this stranger who owed her nothing, was willing to stand between her and the abyss her father had thrown her into. Crowley sneered, but his eyes darted nervously toward the shadows. For a moment, Clara thought he might back down. Instead, his lips curled into a venomous smile. "Fine. If you want her that bad, then she's yours." He spat into the dirt, signaling his remaining man. They holstered their weapons, lifted the wounded one, and staggered back toward the buggy. But as Crowley climbed onto the seat, he turned, his voice dripping with hate. "You haven't seen the last of me, stranger. The law's on my side. Next time I come, I'll bring the sheriff and you'll hang for theft." The buggy wheels rattled into the night, leaving only the glow of the lantern swaying on its post. Clara stood trembling, her wrists raw where Crowley had grabbed her. The stranger holstered his weapon, then met her eyes. "You're safe now," he said simply. But even as his words settled in her chest, Clara knew the truth. She was not safe at all. Crowley's threat hung heavier than the smoke of gunpowder, and when he returned, he would not come alone. The morning sun had barely touched the prairie when Clara found herself staring at the man who had appended her fate. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hat shadowing a face weathered by storms and years. He hadn't said much after Crowley left, only led his horse to the water trough and tended to it, deliberate calm. Clara's father had slipped back inside the house without a word, shame clinging to him heavier than the dust on his boots. Clara folded her arms across her chest. "You should have let him take me." The stranger looked up from cinching his saddle, his gray eyes unreadable. "And let a man treat you like cattle?" "No, I didn't ask for your help," she said sharply. The voice wavered. He pulled the reins free and stood tall, his shadow stretching across the yard. "You didn't have to. Some things don't need asking." Clara bit her lip, fighting the tremor in her throat. It spoke as if it were simple, as if standing against Crowley cost him nothing. Yet she knew men like Crowley. He would not lick his wounds quietly. He would come back with the sheriff and a rope if necessary. "Who are you?" she asked finally. He adjusted the rifle slung across his back. "Name's Elias Kane." The name landed like a stone in her chest. She'd heard whispers about a man who lived on the borderlands, moving between frontier settlements and native villages, belonging to neither, loyal to both. Some called him an outlaw, others a ghost of the plains. Now he stood in her yard, real as the breath in her lungs. Elias studied her face for a moment, then glanced toward the house. He'll sell you again, or worse. Men like Crowley don't give up. Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to believe her father would never try again. The hollow look in his eyes last night haunted her. Debt and shame had already broken him. It was only a matter of time before he bent further. What choice do I have? She whispered. Elias's gaze softened, though his voice remained firm. You come with me. I'll see you safe among. Crowley won't reach you there. The thought terrified her, almost as much as it comforted. Leave the ranch? Leave everything she had fought to keep alive? But what remained of it now? A shack, a withered field, and a father too weak to protect her. Before she could answer, Elias mounted his horse. Think on it. You won't have long. He tipped his hat and rode off down the road, the sound of hooves fading into the prairie wind. Clara stood rooted, her heart a storm of fear and defiance. That evening, whispers spread through town. At the saloon, men muttered over whiskey glasses about the fight at the Monroe Ranch. Some swore Crowley had been humiliated. Others claimed Elias Kane had returned from exile, and that meant trouble. Crowley himself limped through the swinging doors, a bandage on his man's arm and fury burning in his eyes. He ordered a drink, downed it in one gulp, and slammed the glass onto the bar. He thinks he can steal from me, Crowley growled, his voice echoing through the smoke-thick room. No one steals from Jebediah Crowley. A few men chuckled nervously, but most turned away. Crowley wasn't looking for laughter. He was looking for blood. He leaned forward, spitting the words like venom. Next time, I bring the sheriff. And if the law don't bend, I'll bring 10 rifles. That girl will be mine. And kind he'll hang. The saloon fell silent, the piano player letting his fingers rest on the keys. Crowley's shadow stretched across the floor as he stormed out into the night. Outside, Elias Kane waited in the alley, the brim of his hat low. His eyes followed Crowley's every step, his hand resting on the revolver at his side. He had heard every word. And though his face betrayed nothing, deep in his chest Elias knew this fight had only begun. The dawn broke in streaks of pale gold across the prairie, but it brought Clara no warmth. She sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee gone cold. The silence between her and her father was a canyon too wide to bridge. Jacob stared at the floorboards, his face hollow, his hands trembling slightly as if holding ghosts. You should have told him no, Clara said finally, her voice soft but sharp as a knife. Jacob winced, but did not look up. You think I didn't try? Crowley owns half the camp. Men like him don't take no for an answer. Clara's chest ached. She had known her father was drowning in debt, but she had not believed he would drown her with him. She wanted to hate him for it, but the lines on his face told her he had already punished himself more than she ever could. The clatter of hooves outside broke the silence. Clara rose to her feet, her heart hammering. Through the window she saw Elias Kane dismounting, his broad frame cutting against the rising sun. He tied his horse to the rail and strode toward the porch, as if he had walked this land all his life. Jacob stiffened. What's he doing here? Before Clara could answer, Elias stepped through the doorway. His eyes swept the room in one glance, taking in the shabby furniture, the worn floor, the air heavy with unspoken words. He removed his hat, his voice steady but not unkind. Crowley's stirring trouble in town. He's calling you a thief, Jacob. Says you sold your daughter fair and square, and I stole her from him. Jacob's shoulders hunched, shame written in every line. Clara's stomach turned at the word sold. Elias set his hat on the table. Crowley means to bring the sheriff next. If that happens, the law won't be on your side. It'll be on his. Clara's throat tightened. What are you saying? I'm saying you don't have much time. You can stay and wait for him to come back, or you can leave now, with me. The air thickened, every word landing heavy as stone. Clara's eyes flicked to her father, but he would not meet her gaze. He was lost in his own guilt. I can't just leave, she whispered. This is my home. Elias leaned against the doorframe, his expression unreadable. A home's only 4 walls until someone tears them down. Crowley will do that. He wants you broken, Clara, not the land, not the debts. Clara's breath hitched. He had put into words the fear she hadn't dared admit. Jacob finally raised his eyes, his voice cracking. Maybe you should go. Maybe it's the only way you'll live free of him. Clara's chest clenched. Betrayal and love tangled together, leaving her hollow. Before she could answer, a sound split the quiet morning, the distant crack of a rifle. The 3 of them froze. Elias's eyes narrowed. He strode to the window, scanning the horizon. Far off, a line of riders appeared against the sun. Dust plumed behind them, glowing red in the dawn light. Crowley had returned, and this time he had brought company. The thunder of hooves grew louder, rattling the windows and sending the chickens scattering from the yard. Clara pressed her back against the wall, her breath quick and shallow. She counted at least half a dozen riders through the dusty glass, the sun gleaming off rifles and pistols. Crowley had not come to bargain. He had come to claim. Elias pulled his revolver and checked the cylinder with a flick of his wrist, each movement calm, deliberate. He was a man who had seen this before, lived through it, survived it. But Clara's heart felt as though it would burst through her chest. Jacob's face had gone. "If you fight them, they'll hang you for murder," he whispered. "And they'll take her in." Elias turned, his gray eyes steady on Clara. "Then we don't fight them here. We ride." Clara's lips parted, but no sound came. Leave. Leave the house her mother had scrubbed, the land she had worked, the very soil where her childhood had taken root. To walk away now felt like erasing her own bloodline. Elias seemed to read her silence. "You stay, Crowley wins. You go. You've got a chance." It's that simple. The riders had reached the edge of the yard now. Crowley's voice boomed over the morning air. "Jacob Monroe, you got a thief in your house, and I'm here with the law to take him in and collect what's mine." Beside him rode Sheriff Albright, his badge gleaming in the sun, his jaw set in stone. The sight punched the air from Clara's lungs. Crowley had made good on his promise. The law stood at his side. Jacob swore under his breath. "You can't fight the sheriff, Kane. You'll bring the whole county down on you." Elias holstered his revolver, his movements sharp. "I'm not fighting them. I'm getting her out of here." His eyes cut to Clara. "If you trust me." Her throat tightened. Did she trust a man whose name was whispered like a curse in town? Trust someone she had known for less than a day? Yet every word he spoke rang truer than anything her father had offered in months. Outside, the sheriff called, "Step out, Kane. Crowley says you stole property. You'll come quiet, or you'll come dead." The word property stung Clara like a lash. She was flesh and blood, heart and soul, and yet the law saw her as Crowley's due. Something inside her snapped. Clara straightened her shoulders. "I'll go." Elias gave the faintest nod, as if he had expected nothing less. He grabbed her shawl, thrust it into her hands, then opened the back door that led toward the barn. Jacob reached out suddenly, his voice breaking. "Clara, don't leave me." Her chest ached at the plea. But when she looked into his eyes, all she saw was a man shackled by his own cowardice. She bent quickly, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "I have to." Then she turned and followed Elias into the barn. He swung her up onto his horse as if she weighed nothing, then mounted behind her, his arms strong around her waist. The door banged open behind them. Crowley's men poured into the yard, rifles raised. One shouted, "There, the back!" Elias spurred the horse. The animal surged forward, bursting through the open gate, hooves tearing into the earth. Bullets cracked past them, splinters flying from the barn wall. Clara clung to Elias, the world a blur of speed and terror. Behind them, Crowley's voice rang out, shrill with rage. "Run as far as you like, Kane. She be mine if I have to burn this whole land down." The words clung to Clara's ears as the ranch fell away behind them, and deep inside she knew he meant them. The prairie opened wide beneath the pounding hooves, the wind tearing at Clara's hair and shawl as Elias urged the horse faster. She clutched the saddle horn, her body pressed against his, her heart hammering like a drum. Behind them, the thunder of Crowley's riders split the morning calm. "Hold on," Elias growled. Bullets cracked past them, spitting dirt and shards of stone into the air. Clara ducked instinctively, her breath burning her lungs. She had never felt death so close, hot metal slicing through empty space, missing flesh by inches. Elias angled the horse toward a cluster of cottonwoods that lined a narrow creek bed. "We'll lose them in the water," he shouted over the gunfire. The horse plunged down the slope, kicking up mud as it splashed into the shallow current. Clara gasped as icy water soaked her skirts, but Elias never faltered. He drove the horse along the creek, letting the spray mask their trail. For a moment, the shouts of their pursuers faded. Clara dared to breathe, then a shot split the air. Bark exploded from a tree above her head. Clara cried out, clutching Elias's arm. "They're cutting us off," Elias snarled. Ahead, 3 riders appeared on the ridge, rifles ready. Crowley had flanked them. Clara's heart froze. "We're trapped." "Not yet." Elias pulled hard on the reins, turning the horse sharply up the opposite bank. They scrambled onto higher ground, mud flying from the hooves. Clara clung tight as Elias drew his revolver with one hand, his aim steady, even at full gallop. The first rider fired, but Elias's shot came quicker. The man toppled from his saddle, his rifle clattering uselessly down the slope. The second rider reined back in panic, but the third spurred forward, pistol raised. Clara could see the man's teeth bared in a grimace. Without thinking, she grabbed a loose board from the saddle's side, one Elias had used to lash gear, and swung it wildly. It cracked against the rider's hand, knocking the pistol from his grip. The man howled, veering away as Elias fired again, sending him sprawling into the dirt. Clara stared at her own trembling hands, the broken board clattering to the ground. She had never struck another soul in her life, yet in that moment, something fierce had risen inside her. Elias glanced at her, his mouth a grim line, but his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, held something almost like respect. "Good," he muttered. The remaining riders' shouts grew faint as Elias steered them deeper into the thickets beyond the creek. For long minutes the only sounds were the horses' ragged breaths and the pounding of Clara's heart. Finally Elias slowed, bringing the horse to a halt in a shaded hollow hidden by brush. He dismounted quickly, scanning the horizon, then helped Clara down. She collapsed against a tree, her legs trembling. "They'll never stop," she whispered. "He'll never stop." Elias crouched, reloading his revolver with practiced ease. "That's why we don't stop either." Clara pressed her palms to her face, the weight of it all crashing over her. Her home was gone, her father broken, and Crowley's shadow stretched farther than she could see. The world she had known was burning behind her, and ahead lay nothing but wilderness, and this man she barely knew. When she lowered her hands, Elias was watching her. His voice was quieter now, almost gentle. "You fought back today. You chose to live. Don't forget that." Clara opened her mouth, but no words came. Only the memory of Crowley's vow echoed in her skull. "She be mine if I have to burn this whole land down." Somewhere in the distance, faint and cruel, a single gunshot cracked the air. The riders were still hunting. Elias rose, his jaw tight. "We're closer than I hoped." He extended his hand to her. "We move now. No looking back." Clara hesitated only a moment before placing her trembling hand in his. Together, they vanished deeper into the wild, while the echo of pursuit followed close behind. The sun sank fast behind the ridges, bleeding red light across the land as Elias led Clara through a maze of trees and gullies. The horse moved carefully now, its hooves muffled by damp earth and fallen leaves. Every sound seemed louder in the twilight, the snap of a twig, the call of a night bird, the faint jingle of Elias's spurs. Clara clutched the reins with stiff fingers. Her skirts clung to her legs, still damp from the creek. She hadn't spoken much since they'd fled the ranch. The words lay heavy in her chest, like stones she could not lift. Finally she whispered, "He'll hunt me to the ends of the earth." Elias's voice was steady, though quiet. "Then we'll go further than that." Something in the way he said "we" stirred a warmth in her chest she hadn't expected. She shook it away. Trusting a stranger was dangerous, even one who had already risked his life for her. As the last light drained from the sky, Elias slowed the horse. "We'll make camp here." He guided them into a small clearing, half hidden by boulders and thick undergrowth. He swung down, then helped Clara dismount, his hand firm at her waist. Clara steadied herself, refusing to let him see how her knees trembled. "You act like you've done this before." He began gathering brush for a fire. "I've done it more times than I care to count." She watched him strike flint, the sparks catching in dry moss. Soon, a small flame licked upward, casting his face in flickering light. For the first time she saw more than the hardened lines of a fighter. Beneath the weather-beaten skin and gray eyes lay something quiet or tiredness, maybe sorrow. "Why help me?" she asked suddenly. The question had gnawed at her since the moment he'd appeared at the ranch. Elias didn't look up from the fire. "Because no one helped the woman who should have been helped in my past." Clara tilted her head. "What happened to her?" His jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, feeding another branch into the flames. Finally his voice came low. "She was taken, sold. I couldn't stop it." His hand stilled, the firelight catching the scar across his knuckles. "I swore I'd never watch it happen." Clara's breath caught. She wanted to ask more, but the shadows on his face told her the wound ran deep, too deep to pry open. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of fire and the whisper of wind through the trees. Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, staring into the flames. The world she'd known, her home, her father, her pride, was gone. And yet here she sat, alive, because of a man who owed her nothing. A sudden rustle snapped her from her thoughts. Elias was on his feet in an instant, revolver drawn. He motioned her back. Clara's pulse leapt as shadows moved just beyond the firelight. Branches swayed. Then came the faint snort of a horse. "They're close," Elias murmured. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "What do we do?" He kept his eyes on the darkness, his body taut as a drawn bow. "We move. Now, fire will give us away." He kicked dirt over the flames, plunging the clearing into cold darkness. The smoke curled upward, vanishing into the night. Elias grabbed her hand. "Stay close. Don't make a sound." Clara's throat tightened as he led her into the trees, the night pressing down like a shroud. Every step felt like walking on the edge of a cliff. Behind them, voices carried faintly on the wind. Crowley's men, hunting through the wilderness. Elias glanced back once, his eyes catching hers in the pale moonlight. "They think we're prey," he whispered, "but they don't know yet. We bite back." The words chilled her, even as they sparked a fragile flame of hope. And then, far off but clear, a hound bayed into the night. They were being tracked. The night stretched long, a blur of shadows and muffled footsteps, as Elias guided Clara deeper into the wilderness. They crossed stony ridges, slipped through narrow ravines, and forded another creek that swallowed the sound of their trail. The hound's baying faded, replaced by the distant cries of owls and coyotes. By the time the first light touched the horizon, Clara's legs trembled so badly she could barely stand. Her skirts were torn and mud-streaked, her shawl damp with dew. She stumbled once on a loose rock, nearly falling, but Elias caught her arm and steadied her. His grip was strong, unyielding, but he said nothing, just kept her moving. Finally, they crested a ridge where the land opened into a wide hollow hidden between tall bluffs. Clara gasped. Below lay a scattering of cabins, smoke curling from chimneys, the faint clatter of tools echoing up the slopes. Gardens spread in tidy rows, horses grazed in small pastures, and the scent of wood smoke mingled with pine. It wasn't a settlement she recognized. Too small, too tucked away. Yet it was alive, safe, and far from Crowley's reach. Elias's voice was quiet but certain. "My people." They descended the ridge slowly. A few figures emerged from the cabins, men and women of different ages and heritage. Some wore the plain clothes of settlers, others the buckskin and beadwork of native tribes. Clara blinked in surprise. Never before had she seen such a mix. Living together, as if the boundaries the outside world fought over didn't exist here. A tall woman with copper skin and braided hair approached first. Her eyes were sharp, but her smile was warm. "Elias, you bring someone?" "This is Clara Monroe," Elias said. "She's under my protection." The woman's gaze shifted to Clara, studying her mud-streaked dress, the fear lingering in her eyes. Clara felt suddenly small, like an intruder, but then the woman nodded. "If she's with you, she's with us." Clara's throat tightened with unexpected relief. She hadn't realized how deeply she needed those words until she heard them. Elias guided her toward a cabin near the edge of the hollow. "You'll rest here. No one will touch you." Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and smoke. A cot stood by the wall, blankets neatly folded. Clara sat heavily, her body aching, but her mind restless. "They'll find us," she whispered. "Crowley won't stop." Elias leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "He'll try, but he doesn't know these hills. My people have lived hidden here for years. He won't touch you here." Clara searched his face. His confidence was steady, but beneath it she sensed the weight of past battles fought, of threats still looming. The door creaked open. A boy of about 12 peeked inside, his dark eyes wide. "Is it true? Crowley's hunting her?" Elias gave a short nod. "It's true." The boy's jaw tightened. "Then we'll fight. Like always." He darted away before Clara could reply. Her heart swelled at his words, though fear coiled in her gut. She had been running, surviving, clinging to scraps of hope, but these people were ready to bleed for her. Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Rest now. Tonight, we'll decide how to face what's coming." Clara lay back on the cot, exhaustion pulling at her. Yet even as her eyes closed, Crowley's words echoed in her mind. "She be mine if I have to burn this whole land down." Her last thought before sleep claimed her was not of surrender, but of fire. And she wondered if Elias Kane and his people were strong enough to withstand the flames Crowley meant to bring. By dusk, the hollow glowed with lantern light. Families gathered outside cabins, voices low, glances flicking toward the stranger in their midst. Clara felt every eye on her as she stood by the cabin door, her hands knotted in her shawl. She had known judgment before, gossips in town whispering about a woman running a ranch alone. But this was different. Here, the stakes were survival. Elias walked ahead of her, his broad shoulders steady as he led her to the central fire pit. A circle had formed. Men with weathered hands, women with keen eyes, elders whose silence carried weight. Among them stood the copper-skinned woman Clara had met earlier. She spoke first. "You bring her here, Elias. But Crowley's shadow is long. If he finds us, it won't be her alone he takes. He'll take everything we've built." A murmur rippled through the group. Clara lowered her gaze, shame burning her cheeks. She wanted to protest, to say she had never asked for rescue, but her voice withered under the weight of so many stares. Elias's tone was calm but firm. "Crowley was coming for her whether I interfered or not. Do you think he'd have stopped with one rancher's daughter? His greed stretches wider every season." An older man with a scar across his jaw spat into the dirt. "That may be, but why should we bleed for her? She's not one of us." Clara's chest tightened. The truth in his words stung more than the venom. She wasn't one of them. She was an outsider who had dragged danger to their doorstep. Before Elias could answer, Clara found herself speaking. Her voice shook, but it carried. "You're right. I don't deserve your protection. I had a home once. It's gone now. I won't see yours destroyed because of me." Her words seemed to hang in the firelit air. Then Elias stepped forward, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "You talk of who belongs. I've been an outsider my whole life. I've walked between world settler and native, outlaw and lawman. I never belonged anywhere until I built this refuge. And I'll tell you this, a community that only protects its own is no better than the tyrant who seeks to own her. If we turn her away, Crowley wins without ever firing a shot." The fire cracked, sending sparks spiraling upward. The copper-skinned woman studied Clara a long moment, then turned back to Elias. "And if she stays, you'll stake your word on her?" Elias didn't hesitate. "I'll stake my life." The circle went silent. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the woman nodded slowly. "Then she stays. But if Crowley comes, we all fight." A few muttered dissent, but none challenged openly. The decision was made. Clara's throat ached with gratitude and guilt all tangled together. She turned to Elias, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you risk so much for me?" His gray eyes met hers, steady as stone. "Because I won't lose another woman to men like him." The words stirred something deep inside her, a mixture of sorrow, fear, and a flicker of trust she hadn't felt in years. But the moment broke when a boy ran breathless into the circle, his face pale with alarm. "Riders," he gasped. "Smoke on the ridge." The elders turned, fear etched into their faces. Clara's stomach dropped. Crowley hadn't given them even a day. Elias's hand went to his revolver, his jaw tightened. Then it begins. The hollow was no longer quiet. Horses stamped, rifles were checked, and whispers ran through the camp like a rising wind. Clara stood by the cabin, her heart pounding as she watched Elias move among his people. He spoke little, but every man and woman who met his eyes seemed steadier for him. He was no sheriff, no elected leader, yet they looked to him as if the ground itself would split if he willed it. Smoke drifted above the ridge, the smell sharp on the night air. Soon the echo of hooves rolled down the slope, and then they appeared. Crowley and the sheriff at the head of a dozen riders, lanterns swinging, rifles gleaming. The sight froze Clara's blood. Crowley's voice rang out, shrill with triumph. "You thought you could hide her from me, Kane? This hollow belongs to no one. I'll take her now, and you'll swing for theft." The sheriff rode forward, his badge catching the firelight. "By law of this county, Clara Monroe is property of Jebediah Crowley until her father's debts are paid. Hand her over or face justice." A bitter laugh rose from the circle of Elias's people. "Justice." The word felt hollow in the sheriff's mouth, rotten and sharp. Elias stepped forward into the firelight, his shadow stretching long across the dirt. "She's no man's property, and you'll not take her from here," Crowley sneered. Big words for a drifter with a handful of outcasts at his back. Elias's hand hovered near his revolver. "Outcasts or not, we'll stand. If you want her, you'll walk over our graves." The riders shifted uneasily. Some glanced at each other, the weight of Elias's words sinking in. But Crowley's fury burned hotter than fear. He yanked a rifle from one of his men and leveled it at Elias. "Then graves it will be." The crack of the shot split the night. Sparks burst from the fire pit as the bullet struck stone. Chaos erupted. Rifles barked, smoke billowed, and the hollow filled with the thunder of battle. Clara ducked behind the cabin, her ears ringing. Shouts and gunfire blended into a storm. A man staggered past her, clutching his arm. Blood slicked between his fingers. She wanted to run, to disappear into the night, but her feet rooted to the earth. She peeked around the cabin corner just as Elias fired, dropping a rider from his saddle. He moved like a storm himself, steady, unflinching, his revolver an extension of his will. Every shot he fired drove Crowley's men back, but they kept pressing, the sheriff bellowing orders above the din. A flash of movement drew Clara's eyes. Crowley himself had dismounted, moving through the smoke with a pistol aimed straight at Ilias's back. Her breath caught. She opened her mouth to shout, but the words tangled in her throat. Elias turned just in time. The pistol fired, grazing his shoulder. He staggered, dropping to one knee. "Elias!" Clara screamed before she could stop herself. Crowley's eyes found her through the smoke. A cruel smile spread across his face. He raised his pistol, not at Elias this time, but at her. Panic surged through Clara. She pressed herself against the cabin wall, heart hammering. The distance between them was nothing, a handful of strides, yet it felt like a canyon she could not cross. Crowley's voice cut through the chaos, dripping with venom. "Run all you like, girl. You'll always be mine." Elias rose slowly, blood soaking his sleeve, revolver trembling in his grip. His eyes locked on Crowley's. "You'll never own her." The two men leveled their guns at once. The hollow fell into breathless silence as everyone waited for the next shot. The standoff cracked like lightning. Ilias's revolver roared, and Crowley's pistol fired in the same breath. The air split with smoke and flame. Clara's scream caught in her throat as both men staggered backwardly, clutching his side, Elias collapsing to one knee. Chaos surged. Crowley's riders shouted, their rifles flaring. Ilias's people answered with their own fire, the hollow echoing with the fury of war. Horses reared, lanterns toppled, and the night filled with the stench of gunpowder and fear. Clara ducked low and scrambled toward Elias. Bullets hissed through the air, biting into the dirt around her. She reached him just as he steadied himself against a boulder, his face pale but his eyes blazing. "You're hit," she cried. "It's nothing." He gritted his teeth, reloading with a bloodied hand. "Stay down." But even as he spoke, a shadow loomed behind her. Rough hands seized her shoulders, yanking her upright. She cried out, twisting as the reek of sweat and whiskey filled her nose. One of Crowley's men had grabbed her, dragging her backward toward the trees. "Got her," he bellowed. "Boss, I've got the girl," Clara clawed, her voice raw. "Let me go." Panic surged, but so did something fiercer, a memory of Ilias's words. "You fought back today. You chose to live." She rammed her heel down hard on the man's instep. He howled, loosening his grip. Spinning, she snatched at his belt and pulled free the hunting knife she found there. Her hands shook, but she slashed wildly, forcing him to stumble back with a curse. The struggle drew eyes. Through the smoke, Clara saw Crowley pushing forward, blood darkening his coat, but his pistol steady. His gaze locked on her with burning triumph. "You think Cain can keep you?" he snarled, voice ragged. "You'll crawl to me before this night is done." Ilias's voice cut across the hollow, sharp as a... "Clara, down." She dropped to the dirt without thinking. His revolver barked. The man behind her crumpled, the knife tumbling from his hand. Clara's chest heaved as she stared at the lifeless body, horror and relief crashing like waves. Elias limped toward her, grim determination etched into every line of his face. But Crowley moved faster. He lunged forward, pistol raised, and seized Clara's arm in a bruising grip. "She's mine," Crowley roared, shoving the barrel against her temple. The battle around them faltered, the clash of rifles and shouts dimming as eyes turned to the scene. Clara froze, her breath ragged. The cold steel pressed into her skin, the stench of blood and powder thick in her nose. Elias stopped 10 paces away, his revolver steady despite the blood soaking his sleeve. His voice was low, but it carried across the hollow like thunder. "Let her go, Crowley." Crowley laughed, though it came out more like a snarl. "You don't give orders here. You're nothing." She was sold fair, and she stays sold. The law says so. Ilias's jaw clenched. The law is nothing if it makes slaves of the free. The fire crackled between them, smoke swirling in the lantern glow. Clara's heart pounded, her mind racing. She could feel Crowley's fingers digging into her arm, could hear the ragged wheeze of his breath. If Elias fired, she might die too. The entire hollow seemed to hold its breath. Clara's eyes darted to Ilias's, storm gray, unflinching, but filled with something more. Not just resolve, trust. He believed in her. In that instant, Clara understood. The choice was hers. She tightened her grip on the knife still clutched in her hand. The knife trembled in Clara's grip, slick with sweat, but her resolve was iron. Crowley's pistol pressed hard against her temple, his voice a low growl in her ear. "Drop it, girl," he hissed, "or I'll paint this dirt with your brains." Her pulse hammered. She could see Elias just beyond the smoke, revolver raised, his gray eyes locked on hers. He gave the slightest shake of his head, a warning not to act rashly. Yet in his gaze she also saw something else. Faith. He believed she could break free. Crowley jerked her arm, dragging her closer to his chest. His breath reeked of whiskey, his grip bruising her skin. "You hear me? You're mine. Always were, always will be." The words ignited something fierce in her chest. All her life she had fought against drought, against hunger, against the slow decline of her family's ranch. She would not be reduced to property, not now, not ever. With a sudden cry, Clara twisted, driving the knife backward into Crowley's side. His howl split the night. His pistol arm faltered, giving Elias the opening he needed. The crack of Elias's revolver rang out. Crowley's gun spun from his grasp, clattering into the dirt. He staggered, clutching his wound, but before he fell, he struck out wildly with his fist. The blow caught Clara across the cheek, sending her sprawling. Elias surged forward, but another shot cracked through the smoke the sheriff had fired. Elias jerked as the bullet tore across his ribs. He fell hard to one knee, blood staining his shirt. "Elias!" Clara scrambled toward him, her vision swimming. The sheriff reloaded, his jaw clenched. "Enough of this nonsense. The girl belongs to Crowley. The rest of you, lay down your arms or face the law." But the people of the hollow did not lower their rifles. The copper-skinned woman stepped forward, her voice ringing out, "That is no law, it's tyranny." Shouts rose from the circle. The sheriff's men shifted uneasily, their courage faltering. Crowley, wheezing and half-collapsed, spat blood into the dirt. "Kill them all. Burn this place down." But no one moved. His authority bled out with him, draining into the soil. Even his own riders hesitated, casting nervous glances toward one another. Clara crawled to Elias's side. He pressed a hand to his wound, his face pale but his eyes still fierce. "Are you hurt?" he rasped. She shook her head, tears streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. "I thought I'd lost you." His lips curved in the faintest smile. "Not yet." The sheriff raised his revolver again, aiming straight at Elias. Clara's breath caught. She had no weapon but the bloodied knife still clutched in her hand. Before she could move, a rifle cracked. The sheriff cried out, dropping his gun as his hat flew from his head. Smoke rose from the rifle in the copper-skinned woman's hands. "Go back to town," she said coldly. "Tell them Elias Kane and his people bow to no tyrant." The sheriff staggered, rage burning in his eyes, but he saw the circle of rifles aimed at him and knew the fight was lost. He spat into the dirt and turned, dragging his wounded pride with him. Crowley collapsed to his knees, blood soaking his coat. His eyes, wild and glassy, found Clara. "You think this is over?" he rasped. "You'll crawl back to me yet." Clara stood, knife clenched, staring down at the man who had tried to own her. Her voice was steady, stronger than she had ever known it. "No, Jebediah, you'll never touch me again." He fell forward into the dirt, his body still at last. Around her, the hollow was silent save for the crackle of dying fires and the ragged breaths of the survivors. Clara dropped the knife, her hand shaking. She turned back to Elias, who leaned against the boulder, his shirt dark with blood. She whispered, pressing her hands over his wound. His eyes met hers, soft despite the pain. "I'm not leaving you. Not while you still need me." The battlefield smelled of smoke and iron. The hollow that had once echoed with the clatter of tools and children's laughter now pulsed with the groans of the wounded and the soft weeping of women tending them. Lanterns swung on hooks, casting long shadows over bodies laid in the dirt. Some of Crowley's men, some of Elias's people. Clara moved among them, her cheek bruised, her hands still stained with Crowley's blood. She carried water, tore strips of cloth for bandages, and pressed shaking palms to wounds. She had never been a healer, but desperation lent her skill. Each time she touched the skin of another, she thought of Elias bleeding, silent, watching her with those storm-gray eyes as if weighing her spirit. When she returned to him, he sat propped against a cabin wall, his shirt cut away to reveal the ragged bullet graze along his ribs. Blood stained the bandage they had wrapped tight around him. Clara knelt, her voice trembling. "You need a doctor." His lips curved faintly. "There's no doctor out here, only grit and luck." She dabbed his wound with water, careful not to meet his eyes. "You risked everything." He winced, but his voice was steady. "You risked it too. I saw you fight." Clara swallowed hard. "I didn't think I could." "You didn't think. You chose." His gaze fixed on her, sharp despite the exhaustion. "That's the difference." Her chest ached, but for the first time it wasn't just fear. It was something deeper, a stirring of strength she hadn't known she carried. A shout rose from the edge of the hollow. Clara glanced up to see the boy from before sprinting toward them, breathless. The sheriff's men, what's left of them, they're gone. But Crowley's riders said he had more waiting down in town. "They'll come again." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Some voices trembled with fear, others sharpened with anger. The copper-skinned woman lifted her rifle and spoke firm. Then we stand ready. This land is ours to defend. Clara rose to her feet, her hands curling into fists. For so long she had fought alone against drought, against wolves, against debt that strangled tighter every year. Alone she had been beaten. But here, with these people, she felt something different. Not just survival, belonging. Then I'll fight too, she said aloud. The words carried before she could stop them. All eyes turned to her. Doubt flickered in some, surprise in others. Elias tilted his head, studying her as if seeing her anew. "You'd fight with us?" the woman asked. Clara lifted her chin. "Crowley thought he could buy me, break me. He was wrong. I won't run anymore." Silence held a moment, then the boy grinned wide. "She's one of us now." The circle loosened, voices rising in agreement. For the first time since leaving her ranch, Clara felt the weight on her chest ease. She was no longer just the woman sold over debt. She was someone who could choose, who could stand. Elias's voice came low but clear. Then it settled. "We fight as one." The crowd murmured assent, but Clara's eyes stayed on him. His face was pale, his body weakened, yet he still radiated a strength that bound these people together. She realized then that his fight had never just been about her, had been about defying every man like Crowley who believed others could be owned. As the night deepened, the hollow grew quiet again, though the air was heavy with what lay ahead. Clara sat beside Elias, her shoulder against his, and whispered, "Whatever comes, we'll face it." He turned his head, meeting her gaze. For the first time since she had known him, a real smile touched his lips. And though danger loomed just beyond the ridges, Clara felt, for the first time in years, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The dawn rose blood-red over the bluffs, a warning painted across the sky. Clara stood on the ridge beside Elias's people, rifle heavy in her hands. She had never fired one at more than coyotes, but her grip was steady now. The bruises on her cheek ached, her body stiff from sleepless hours, but fear had burned into something hard to resolve. Below, dust rose in a long plume. Crowley had made good on his threat. Dozens of riders swarmed the valley floor, their banners of smoke and lanterns twisting upward like carrion birds. At their head rode Sheriff Albright, face set like stone, and beside him, Crowley himself. He was pale from blood loss, wrapped in bandages, but his eyes still burned with venom. The copper-skinned woman, Sarah, stood tall at Elias's side, her voice carrying over the ridge. "This is our land. We fight for it or we lose it forever." Murmurs of assent rippled through the defenders. The boy clutched a pistol too large for his hands, his jaw tight with courage. Clara's chest swelled with pride and dread all at once. Elias leaned heavily on the boulder, his wound bound tight but his eyes unyielding. He could barely stand, yet he had refused to stay behind. His voice was low but clear. "They'll come hard. But remember, Crowley fights with fear. Break that, and he's nothing." The riders below fanned out. The sheriff raised his rifle, signaling the charge. The earth trembled as horses thundered forward, dust and smoke billowing around them. "Steady," Sarah shouted. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. She took aim, her hands trembling, and whispered a prayer she barely remembered from childhood. The ridge erupted in gunfire. Bullets hissed through the morning air, biting into the first wave of riders. Horses screamed, men toppled, chaos spread through Crowley's ranks. Clara fired once, the recoil jarring her shoulder, but she saw a rider drop. Shock rippled through her. She had struck true. Below, Crowley raged, bellowing for his men to press forward. The sheriff rode at his side, firing into the ridge, his badge glinting in the sun like a false promise of justice. The battle became a storm. Smoke choked the air, gunfire cracked like thunder, and screams echoed through the hollow. Clara reloaded clumsily, her fingers slick with sweat, then fired again. She saw the boy stumble, his pistol knocked from his hands. Without thinking, she dashed forward, dragging him behind cover as bullets shredded the earth around them. "You're not dying today," she hissed, shoving the pistol back into his grip. His eyes were wide, but he nodded, steadier now. Elias's voice cut through the din. "Clara." She turned. He stood exposed at the ridge's edge, his revolver aimed square at Crowley below. The two men's eyes met across the smoke-filled battlefield, their hatred sharp enough to cut steel. Crowley raised his pistol, teeth bared. "She's mine, King. Always." "No," Elias growled. "She's free." Both fired at once. The sheriff spurred his horse forward, shouting, and the bullets vanished into the haze. Clara's heart lurched. She couldn't see who had been hit. Then Elias staggered, blood blooming anew at his side. He collapsed to one knee, revolver slipping from his grip. "No!" Clara screamed. She dropped her rifle and sprinted toward him, heedless of the bullets raining around her. She slid to his side, catching his head in her hands. His face was ashen, his breath shallow. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "Please." Ilias's gray eyes fluttered open, finding hers. Don't stop. You fight. Now. His words struck her harder than any bullet. She snatched up his revolver, rose to her feet, and faced the battlefield. Crowley was still there, wounded but upright, screaming orders through bloodied lips. The sheriff reloaded, his rifle aimed squarely at her. Clara raised the revolver with both hands. Her voice rang out clear and sharp as steel. This ends today. The sheriff's shot cracked, and Clara fired in the same breath. The world seemed to hold still as smoke coiled between them. The two shots echoed together, a single crack of thunder that rolled through the hollow. Clara's heart seized in her chest as the sheriff's rifle jerked upward, his body twisting in the saddle. He toppled heavily into the dust, his badge glinting once before the earth swallowed him. For a breathless moment, all was still. Smoke drifted across the ridge, the cries of battle dying into silence. Crowley stared at Clara, his bandaged chest heaving, his face pale with rage and disbelief. You, he rasped, staggering. A woman, a worthless ranch girl. Clara raised Ilias's revolver again, her voice ringing clear. Not worthless. Not yours. Never again. Crowley stumbled forward, clutching his side. You'll crawl back. You'll beg. No, she said simply and pulled the trigger. The shot struck him square in the chest. His eyes widened, the last flicker of venom draining away as he collapsed into the dust. For all his wealth, his power, his threats, he died like any man. The hollow fell silent. Crowley's remaining riders, leaderless and shaken, dropped their weapons. Some fled outright, galloping back toward town. Others raised their hands, surrender plain in their faces. Sarah's voice rose, sharp as steel. This fight is over. Go back to your master's ashes and never return. The men didn't argue. They scattered like smoke on the wind. Clara lowered the revolver, her hands trembling. The weight of what she had done pressed heavy on her, but beneath it burned something else. Freedom. She turned, rushing back to Elias. He lay propped against the boulder, pale but alive, blood soaking through the bandage at his side. His gray eyes flickered open as she knelt beside him. It's done, she whispered, tears streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. Crowley's gone. A faint smile tugged at his lips. I told you. We bite back. She let out a laugh that was half sob, half relief. You stubborn fool. You nearly died. But I didn't. His hand found hers, rough and warm despite the blood. Because you stood. You chose. Clara squeezed his hand tightly. She had chosen. Not to run, not to hide, but to fight for her life, for her dignity, for the people who had taken her in when the world had cast her aside. Sarah knelt nearby, checking Ilias's wound with practiced hands. He'll live, she said firmly, but he'll need time, and someone who won't let him do anything foolish while he heals. Her eyes twinkled as they shifted to Clara. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. In the days that followed, the hollow rebuilt. The wounded were tended, cabins repaired, and the smoke of victory gave way to the smoke of cook fires once more. Clara worked beside them, hauling water, mending roofs, grinding corn with the women, teaching children how to saddle horses. She found herself woven into their days, not as a burden, but as a part of the fabric. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of gold, Clara sat outside the cabin where Elias rested. He had grown stronger, though the scar at his side would forever remind him of that night. He watched her from the porch, a rare softness in his eyes. You belong here, he said quietly. Clara looked out over the hollow, the children chasing each other near the stream, the men repairing a wagon, the women tending gardens that promised new life. Belong. The word struck her deep. For so long she had fought to keep a ranch that had slipped through her fingers no matter how hard she tried. But here, she wasn't fighting alone. She turned back to Elias, her lips curving into a smile. We both do. He reached out his hand. She took it, settling beside him. The silence between them was no longer heavy, but whole. When the first stars pricked the sky, Clara lifted her gaze and whispered, I was sold as a debt, but here, I found my worth. Ilias's hand tightened around hers. And no one will ever take it from you again. The night settled warm and still, the hollow breathing with quiet life. The first time in years Clara felt safe, not because danger had vanished, but because she had faced it and endured. She was no man's property, no pawn in a ledger. She was Clara Monroe, a fighter, a survivor, a woman reborn among her people. And as the fireflies rose from the grass and drifted like sparks into the dark, she knew this was only the beginning. Clara's story reminds us that no matter how heavy the chains of life may seem, courage and dignity can never be sold. Freedom is born when we choose to stand and fight for who we truly are. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment when you had to choose between fear and freedom? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read your stories. And if this tale moved your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey into the old frontier.